If you would, open your Bibles to Psalm 44. That's where I want to go. Sometimes I get too much credit, so I'm not trying to do that either. I believe it's impossible to be too humble. So I don't get there yet. Psalm 44 is a lesson that I have preached many times in gospel meetings. The beginning of the hymn reminds me of my boyhood days with my grandfather. And I hope that I can bring that out a little bit in the reading. But if you would, read with me verses 1 through 4. 1 through 4. Let me do the way you should be reading it. Verse 1 in the Hebrew Bible is, to the chief musician, a contemplation of the sons of Korah. That is verse 1 in Hebrew Bible. Now, we have heard with our ears, O God, our fathers have told us, the deeds you did in their days, in days of old. You drove out the nations with your hand, but then you planted. You afflicted the peoples and cast them out, for they did not gain possession of the land by their own sword, nor did their own arm save them. But it was your right hand, your arm, and the light of your countenance, because you favored them. When I was a boy, I enjoyed listening to my grandfather tell his stories. And even when I was in my 20s, he would repeat some of those stories. And my grandmother would say, Aldi, that was, also was his name, hers is Aldi. She would say, you told that story 100 times to him. And I would tell her, let him tell me again. I really did enjoy listening to my grandfather. We'd have trips on the road to go to the cattle barn. We'd talk all the time. It was just a privilege. Now, in regards to that, I grew up hearing lessons or illustrations that I had not heard at church before. But over time, the illustrations he was giving were the ones that I began to hear on other occasions. And one of my favorites was that he tells the story about a young boy really disobedient, talking back, not the kind of child you'd want your child to be. And the mother came up with the idea, this is an old story, of putting nails in his room in the wall. And after a while, he had the walls in his room full of nails. And his friends would come over and they kind of poke fun at him. What's it about, all these nails? But he didn't want to tell them what it was. And though he goes now to his mother and he will say to her, if you will get those nails out, I'd do anything. And she said, well, if you obey me every time I tell you, I'll pull one out. Well, it was a long time because she'd been disobedient. But finally, she pulled out the last one. And then he was sad, and she was kind of looking, and what's wrong? He said, the holes are still there. And I thought that was a great illustration when I was a kid. We don't realize that we can be forgiven, but the damage has already been done. And that's the lesson that we would have and need to have. Well, he had other stories like that. I'm not going to go all through the stories. But I love listening. And when I hear sermons, I remember I'd be on this side of the building. The preacher at Sewell Hall would be preaching at North Birmingham. He'd be up in the pulpit, and the boys would be seated against that wall. So everybody in the auditorium would just see us. And the fellow next to me was called Tommy, and he would snore. And I'd be focused on what Sewell Hall was saying. I can still remember a couple of those lessons that I heard when I was a boy, and I have not heard him preach since. But I just enjoy listening and finally getting something out of a lesson that I could take home with me, so to speak. And I didn't have notes or anything. It just stood out in my mind for a long, long time. I feel like in this story, this young man is that person. When he said, "We have heard with our ears, O God, our fathers have told us." You know, a lot of times we think that because of the period of the judges, nobody was telling the old story, but some were. And we can confirm that by the story of Ruth. Her story is in the time of the judges. So there were godly people back then. It's just not as prolific, spread out as it was before. But we've heard, and the story of driving out the nations. And then the lesson was, I like the fathers who told the lesson that it wasn't their strength, it wasn't, that they were so pleasing to God. It was just because God was gracious to them. And so upon hearing that, and notice the emphasis, but the fathers would say, it was your right hand, your arm, the light of your countenance, because you favored them. Now, that fellow was listening, and he wants to apply it. I love it when people who listen well and want to apply what they hear. Read verses 4 through 8. You are my king, O God. This is the young man talking. Command victories for Jacob. Through you, we will push down our enemies. Through your name, we will trample those who rise up against us. For I will not trust in my bow, nor shall my sword save me, but you have saved us from our enemies, and have put to shame those who hated us. In God we boast all day long, and praise your name forever. And there's that phrase, Selah. It's considered to be like a pause, maybe, in a musical way. And it's a great place to take a moment to think. But just thinking of this young man applying the lesson, he really did appreciate. It was you, O Lord. Now command those victories. And through you, we will push down our enemies. Through your name, we're going to triumph. For I will not trust in my sword, my bow. I won't have confidence in myself. I have confidence in the Lord. I believe if that hymn had ended there, that might be one of our favorite hymns to read all the time, because it's got such a positive view of things. Let me repeat verse 8. In God we boast all day long. And all day long is not enough. And praise your name forever. Don't you like that? It was one day and it will continue in that way. But I always tell my classes, whenever you see the word but, there's a shift. I recall one that I like in a positive way. Jehoshaphat had gone to help Ahab, a wicked king. Y'all would know that. And he almost lost his life in that battle. And he just got back safely, no harm done to him. But the prophet was sent to him. And the prophet rebuked him And the prophet said, you love those who hate the Lord. And wrath has come out against you. And then the but word. I love that reading. But nevertheless, I found good things in you. And that you've taken away the idolatry from the nations. You know, if God's angry with you, wouldn't you love to have a but word at the end? There'd be something that he would still appreciate. That's what happened with the king, Jehoshaphat. But reading on, you have cast us off and put us to shame, and you do not go out with our armies. You make us turn back from the enemy, and those who hate us have taken spoil for themselves. As when, well, turn on, I turned 2 pages. Yes. You have given us up like sheep intended for food, and scattered us among the nations. You sell your people for next to nothing and are not enriched by selling them. The young man is saying, we've lost, and you have not gone with us as you've gone with your people in the past. And he's kind of wondering, is there's any benefit in our failure, in our defeat? He says, you sell your people for next to nothing and are not enriched by selling them. You gain no profit in this. Verse 13, you make us a reproach to our neighbors, a scorn and a derision to those all around us. You make us a byword among the nations, a shaking of the head among the peoples. My dishonor is continually before me, and the shame of my face has covered me. Because of the voice of him who reproaches and reviles, because the enemy and the avenger. At a point like this, we might have heard in Bible classes before, when Israel was faithful, they won. When they were unfaithful, they lost. That is not so. And you'll see it in this hymn. It's not only in this hymn. David will suffer a defeat and with the Edomites. And it looks like they took advantage of when David was away in a battle, they were attacking Israel from behind. And when they come back, David is saying, well, we'll go again in your name. And they go again. I think sometimes God wants to know, what will we do if we're not always winning? Sometimes the people of God, think about all those prophets who were faithful, and they have been persecuted, they've been killed. It wasn't because they hadn't been faithful. It's because they were faithful. Read on with me in verse 17. All this has come upon us, but we have not forgotten you, nor have we dealt falsely with your covenant. Now, this is an inspiring account. This isn't just one person saying, I thought it was this way, but maybe it wasn't. He's saying, we were faithful. Read on. Our heart has not turned back, nor have our steps departed from your way. But you have severely broken us in the place of jackals and covered us with the shadow of death. That defeat was terrible. And there's no explanation in the mind of this poet to give. It gets even deeper. Verse 20, If we had forgotten the name of our God, if we had, or stretched out our hands to a foreign God, would not God search this out? But for he knows the secrets of the heart. Yet for your sake, we are killed all day long. We are accounted as sheep for the slaughter. Before we think he's wrong, this is quoted in Romans chapter 8. And the early Christians in Rome were suffering. They were being persecuted, but they were not suffering because of sin in their lives. You remember the book of Revelation, the fifth seal being opened, and the souls of those martyrs are crying out to the Lord, when will you avenge our blood that's been shed on the earth? Those people, by the way, they were called, what do you call them? Martyrs. You know, that's a Greek word for witness, but they transformed that word into people who gave their testimony, and they died doing it. And they are stamped with that term. And to this very day, we use the word martyr for those who have suffered for a cause wrongfully. Coming back. Verse 23, awake, why do you sleep, O Lord? Can you imagine someone talking to God that way? I don't want my kids to wake me up saying, what are you doing sleeping today? I don't want to give them that example anyway. But awake, why do you sleep, O Lord? Arise, do not cast us off forever. Why do you hide your face and forget our affliction and our oppression? For our soul is bowed down to the dust. Our body clings to the ground. This is their last moment. Arise for our help and redeem us not because we're faithful, but for your mercy's sake. I think that's a thoughtful thing to have in mind. They're not calling on God now because we are faithful. We're calling on you because of who you are and how you are merciful. Isn't that the way that Moses pleaded with God? With children of Israel sinning over and over and over and complaining. And the Lord would say, I need to wipe these people out and start all over. And Moses would plead with the Lord on the basis of his mercy, on the basis of his goodness. Now, that story to me about Moses pleading with God has an answer. God said, I've heard you, and I will forgive them. But, he says, I will not go up to the promised land with you. I think a lot of people in this world will say, okay, I can live with that. You know, land flowing with milk and honey, prosperity, yeah. But Moses couldn't. Moses will say, if your presence does not go with us, do not take me up from here. What's Moses saying? He'd rather die in the wilderness with God than to get to the promised land without him. Do we feel that way? Are we expecting the Lord to act in our favor, what we should want and all we ever need is his presence in our lives. I think sometimes, and I remember when I came to the States, moved back from Argentina, we went to buy a mattress, and the fellow wanted to talk about God and the Bible, the church. And he said, I don't want to survive, I want to thrive. And what he meant by that, he was going through some hard economical times. Is that what people want? Are people wanting to go to heaven just because they heard their streets of gold up there and their mansions? And I heard about pearly gates. We ought to want to be with the Lord, to be with the Lord. The greatest blessing in the Bible, repeated in the Old Testament, and runs through the Old Testament, and even into the New Testament, and even in the book of Revelation, where God says, I will be your God, and you will be my people. It doesn't get better than that. That's what it's always about. I will be your God. You ought to trace that through the Old Testament. Jeremiah uses it 5 times in his book. And it's quoted in Hebrews chapter 8. You know, it's just a great theme for us to take hold of. We want the Lord, not just what the Lord can give us. When I was younger, living in Argentina, people in Chile had a saying when they would get married. They'd say something, with you, bread and onions. There would be nothing more that they would want. Well, I thought that was an interesting statement. And it really is a statement that says this is true love for them. I have known, and it grieves me to know, that sometimes girls maybe want to marry because it was terrible at home, and that is terrible. Or sometimes they will say, I want to marry up. And they want to marry someone that can provide and take care of them. That's not a good reason for you to get married. Somebody will say, it's been terrible for me. But you must want the Lord for the Lord, and you should marry because you trust and love that person, and you appreciate those qualities, both for the man and for the woman. Now, I know that happens. I've heard them say it. Why do you want to go to heaven then? It's not just to get away from the world. It's to be with the Lord forever. And it doesn't have to have pearly gates, and it doesn't have to have streets of gold, and that's imagery. What you need is the Lord. I wish is a sweet word. I would long for people just to want the Lord. And I know it's the greatest blessing of the Bible. I will be your God, and you will be my people. That is the best part, the relationship that we have with him. Redeem us for your mercy's sake. That's a beautiful phrase. Because you are merciful. Your love is everlasting. Do it because of who you are. But did you hear what Moses said? If you do not go up with us to the promised land, do not take me up from here. He'd rather die in the wilderness with God than to make it to the land of milk and honey. Is that our kind of thinking? It should be, and it can be. We just got to immerse ourselves and see what they saw. You know, somebody who never read the Bible, someone who doesn't know anything about what it means to be a Christian, may not have a good example in front of them. But when we read about God in the Bible, we read about his greatness and his goodness. And we have no demands. And I'm expecting this. I just want to be with the Lord. Should we have that mentality? We need to, and we must. And I like this hymn. It didn't end on our faithfulness. It ended on his mercy's sake. That's the way to go into battle. You see, the thing that they would carry to battle, the priest would give a benediction. The idea is, may he lift up his face upon us, lift up his countenance upon us. Just look at us as he is, and all will be what is needed. You need to ask yourself how much you want to go to heaven. And it has to be because you want to be with the Lord forever. Well, I think passages like that need to be read, need to be considered, and need to be embraced. Once you see that it has to be, then you take hold of that. And that will take you to heaven where you need and want to be. Today, if you're not a Christian, we're not just wanting you to escape the flames of hell. We want you to know the Lord and to know that circumstances may never change in some favorable way, but you'll be with the Lord. And think of all those early Christians who died for their testimony. That's why it's quoted in Romans. It wasn't because of some terrible thing they had done. It's because they were faithful. And they suffered and paid the consequence. One other illustration. We talk about sheep and, wolves in sheep's clothing. And a lot of times we think, well, you can see, the viciousness, but they're kind of hiding. No, sheep's clothing was the wardrobe, if you want to call it, of all the prophets. They had nothing more. Nothing more. And prophets can look like, oh, we're miserable. They don't look that way today. They look like they're well-dressed and, they don't look like they're in poverty. They drive a Lexus or something else. They look prosperous. And people flock to them because they want to be like that. Sheep's clothing was the only attire that those prophets would have on a regular basis. It wasn't the fashion of the day. It's the only thing they could wear to keep warm. That's who we need to be. And whatever the price may be, may we pay it joyfully, knowing that we can be forever with the Lord. If we can help you in that way, we want to. While together we sing, while we sing.